Well, the major challenge you typically have is that if you don't have any sort of bookkeeping or tax related things or tracking for that, how do you really know how profitable you are?
Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in. I just want to let you know this conversation podcast with Chris was made possible thank you to Accounting Cyclops, where their job is to seamlessly connect and integrate the accounting softwares you use, whether that's Zero or QuickBooks, along with your Amazon, Walmart, or TikTok, all in one place. And what's best about it is you can see everything in real data, see real metrics and profit. Again, so that way you can make the best decisions in order to help grow your own business. So again, thank you for counting Cyclops. And without further ado, let's get right to it. All right, everyone. Today we've got a guest who's walked the walk and is now helping e-commerce business owners navigate the numbers game. And he's super highly sought out after, accounting and tax expert for e-commerce business. And he's the founder of company of Tall Oaks. Chris Potter, thank you for your time and being here.
Hey, pleasure to be here. It's everyone loves taxes, and let's talk taxes and bookkeeping. We love it.
Yeah, it is definitely the subject of the town when it comes towards the end of the year and sometimes the beginning of the year and stuff like that. But for the viewers that aren't familiar with you, do you mind just spending a few minutes just introducing your background and kind of like where we at right now?
Absolutely. I originally was a seller, just like everyone probably watching this. I originally started in 2005 selling on eBay out of my basement. And over time, I transitioned over to full time Amazon in 2008. And I've pretty much done every business model you can think of. I've done arbitrage, I've done wholesale, private label, drop shipping as well. And we ended up exiting out of our Amazon business in 2020. In our last year of business, we did about 13 million in sales. So we're pretty large size, and I pretty much have been through the whole ringer when it comes to selling. And then when I exited in 2020, I ended up purchasing a bunch of retail tax offices, which mostly focus on non-business clients. And that's located in North Carolina and Virginia. We have 38 offices currently between those two states, and we do about 12,000 tax returns between all those locations every
Oh
year.
wow.
And then in 2022, we started a separate business called Taluk Advisors, which is specifically just for e-commerce sellers, where we handle bookkeeping and taxes. So we've taken all that background I have and we've combined it with the tax and bookkeeping aspect. And right now we have about 135 clients that work with us for bookkeeping, and we have about 350 clients that work with us for taxes, specifically just for e-commerce.
Yeah, that's super amazing. And we're not doing a plug here or anything. I'm actually one of your clients and been with a few years, so definitely recommend you guys and to the viewers here as well. But when I first started getting to Amazon, I didn't know anything about accounting and taxes. That was like a fear, right? I'm sure like other Amazon sellers. And the biggest thing we just wanted to get involved with is just like making money and sourcing and stuff like that, and
Mhm.
let the experts handle the accounting and taxes. So just to kind of start with, like why are accounting and bookkeeping like super critical for Amazon sellers, and what are common mistakes sellers should avoid to get started with?
Well, the major challenge you typically have is that if you don't have any sort of bookkeeping or tax related things or tracking for that, how do you really know how profitable you are? You really
Right.
don't. And I can kind of tell you a story from when I was actually a seller. And when I first started out, just like a lot of people today, you really didn't know what you were doing, especially when it comes to finances. And I had a financial background, but e-commerce is just very, very difficult to kind of like have all these inner working parts to make sure it's working, to make sure you know exactly what the numbers are. And over time, like I really didn't know exactly what my numbers were either. I ended up almost going bankrupt in
Wow.
2013 because of that. I ended up having to close down my entire Amazon business and start a brand new business in 2014, which ended up obviously doing very, very well because we were able to exit in 2020. But a lot stemmed from me just not fully understanding the financial aspect of it. That was part of it. So I spent a lot of time making sure that the finances for my business were accurate, and I spent a lot of time learning how to make sure the bookkeeping is correct, make sure that the finances are correct as well. And that's what enabled us to kind of know where we were at. It made us allow us to make those business decisions to change like what our sourcing patterns are, maybe potentially change how our like how much we're paying our VAs, whether it's time to start paying ourselves. These are all questions that a lot of sellers typically will ask, and you don't know any of that if you don't know your true numbers.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing, like with Amazon especially, like there's so many different fees. There's the fee for literally everything. And like how do you guys deal with that to maintain like accuracy and compliance, regarding like each person's business? Because I'm sure it's not easy.
Well, the first thing we do is we put our pants on, and then we have them charge us a fee for that.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's the first thing we do. But that's after we're done with that specific fee from Amazon. What we're mostly doing is we're just grabbing all of the different reports from Amazon, the different selling platforms, and we're doing a lot of, I won't say mental gymnastics. We got people that do a very good job as far as grabbing all this information. We typically will put it into a software platform like QuickBooks or Zero, and then we
Okay.
utilize connectors to bring in all of that data from Amazon, the various selling platforms you have, into that software. And once we have that connection, there's a lot of other things you have to do as a bookkeeper, but that's kind of like the main thing to make sure you're pulling everything directly from those platforms and making sure they're actually correct. That's definitely step number one.
Okay, so Zero and QuickBooks, yeah, super helpful because in today's age, with AI and all this stuff, uh, there's really a lot of progress from where it started. Because from I'm sure you did and like I did as well. We all started with the basics, Google Sheets, Excel, and stuff like that. And eventually, might have used a software. Then to the next step is probably using your own bookkeeping services with Tall Oaks. And how has software really impacted? Because back then, or a job of three people could be done by one person now with an assistance of software, not just with accounting taxes, but throughout the entire, it's super disruptive and revolutionary, as a lot of people are saying. So, how is that like software has really helped out in terms of both parties, the seller and your business as well?
Well, I have experience with this as well, oddly enough, because when we were doing bookkeeping for my old businesses, we did not have software like this. We absolutely did not have it. So what we had to do is we had to download reports from Amazon, eBay, all these other platforms we're selling on. Literally download the reports, do a bunch of mental gymnastics inside of Excel, and once we figured all of that out, then we would make manual entries into QuickBooks or Zero, which you can imagine how long that takes. And
Yeah,
honestly, when we first started our e-commerce background for helping e-commerce clients, that's actually the same thing we started doing because that's what my background was.
yeah,
And the first person I hired from our bookkeeping staff, she came to me and was like, "This takes way too long. We need to figure something else out." And she actually had background with one of those types of software platforms, and she's like, "Let's try out some of these." And it took us from it would take her about 2 hours to basically just take care of one client of bringing this information in, compared to using a software solution where you click a button and it's done.
yeah. Syncs everything. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's like it's like absolute night and day. It's like it's like when you're making a difference of you having to spend 8 hours sourcing yourself or having a VA do a majority of the work for you, and all you're doing is reviewing it for an hour. It's a
Yeah.
huge difference there between the two things, and it was just mind boggling once we saw the difference.
Yeah, it's amazing what technology can really do. Because back then, like I can only imagine the people reaction is like, oh, Google Sheets, Excel, like this is the next greatest thing. But now it's like we're way past that. So for small sellers, when do you say like is the right time for them to kind of like step up to that level where they're just starting out, Excel and kind of just like doing their own thing. Like they might not even have an LLC.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I've wavered on this over the years. In some cases, I've thought, well, maybe they can kind of get away with not doing anything for until they're like 5 grand a month or 10 grand a month in those ranges. But the thing is I've talked to a lot of sellers, and when I mean a lot of sellers, I'm talking we're probably in the 500 to 1,000 range, somewhere in that range. I've talked to different sellers at all different levels of of selling. Some were very, very new, some of them have been around for a long time. And what I've realized is that the sellers that end up doing well and have been around for a long time, they mostly started their bookkeeping earlier than you would imagine. What I mean by this is that a lot of people just start with Excel, and that's kind of what they start out with. And that's okay for some people that are good with Excel and they're able to track literally everything. They're able to figure this stuff out. But a lot of times people just aren't doing everything in Excel like you would expect. And so they'll have these profit numbers that they're thinking, and you compare that to what the reality is, and it's way different. And imagine if you're trying to make business decisions based off of, all right, well, I think I made $1,000 this month versus, okay, I made $5 this month.
Yeah.
It's a big difference. One of
Yeah.
them allows you to continue to stay in business. The other one doesn't allow you to buy anything at Starbucks. So, there's a big difference between those two. And you just kind of need to make sure you know exactly what you're doing, because you also think about reinvestment back into the business. And if you have $5, I mean, you're not going very far. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, what's really common as well with other Amazon sellers is they have the mentality of just like buying more, like it's the
Mhm.
obsession of scaling, borrowing loans, credit cards and stuff like that. So, you know, you mentioned you've talked to, 500,000 sellers plus you're going to all these different conventions, right? So you have a plethora of data that, you can collect with.
Mhm.
What are some mistakes that early Amazon sellers that just get stuck into, like, to a trap because what they see in, social media like Instagram
Mhm.
or, X, for example?
Well, you pretty much named a big one. You already named a big one, which was basically looking at everyone else's numbers and thinking, "Oh my lord, like they're selling, look at these green bars, they're selling hundreds of $1,000s a month. I need to get there as soon as possible." So what do? They just continue to rack money up on their credit cards. And the reality is a lot of people, the reason why people do this is they're basing a lot of their experience based off of what they did in their personal lives in some cases. And if you think about your personal life, not everyone is great with finances in their personal life either. And what do you typically do? Well, you want to buy something, you put it on a credit card, and you hope you pay it off every month. That's kind of like the typical strategy a lot of people come into running an Amazon business. And that's not how you run a successful business. You have to be able to know how much you're putting onto the cards, and then think about how long it's going to take to sell through your inventory. Because if you're buying, let's say you're doing arbitrage and you're just starting out, how long is it going to take you to sell this stuff off? In some cases, it can take, by the time you bring it in and then you send it into Amazon, and then it goes through their 18 billion centers that they have, or even if you send it to a prep center and send, and there's all this lag period in there, and then you got these transfers, or a transfer from Chicago to Illinois to over to Maine, and they're doing all their transfers. By the time you actually get up for sale, and then by the time you actually sell the stuff, it might be what, two
A
months?
month, yeah, a month, 2 months, yeah, exactly.
By the time you sell your stuff off. But when does your credit card due?
Every 30 days at the end
Every
of the
30.
month.
Exactly. See, there's a little bit of a lag period in there, but that's really where the challenge tends to run into play. Is people think, oh, I can just get the payout from Amazon and just pay off my credit card. Well, that sounds good in theory, but the reality is that, like I said, most people don't realize there's this big lag period of this. So most of the time when you're buying inventory, you are having to pay it off with some money, but not all of the money from it. So it's kind of ends up being this big hamster wheel over time, and you start running out of money, and you're like, oh crap, I need more money, let me open up a new credit card, which then solves the problem for a very short period of time until you rack up that credit card. Then you're like, oh crap, I need more I need more debt.
Yeah.
Before you know it, you've got a wallet full of credit cards you can't even hold anymore. You can't even sit down anymore because you got this wallet full of credit cards, and like you're basically having back pain just from all these credit cards. And realistically, that's not the way you want to go. It's more or less, you need to make sure that you have the proper amount of debt, ensuring that line of debt that you have aligns with your money that you have to pay it off on a regular basis. And the majority of the problem usually lies from wanting to just scale way too fast. So go slower. It's okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like, instead of worrying about your own thing, you're looking out there where within your own thing, there's a lot of things that you could improve, right?
Hmm.
So, yeah, I was there when I first getting started. Just like, it's like, wow, like $10,000 a month, crazy. Now
Yep.
it's a whole different ball game and stuff like that.
And
And
then of course, like when we're thinking about it from a personal perspective, like especially when you're starting out, if if you're younger and you really haven't had much of a job or anything, the first time you see that huge payout from Amazon of like, $5,000, like that's a big deal. You've never even
Yeah.
seen $5,000 in your account ever, and it's a big deal. And you're
Yeah.
like, man, I'm rich. I'm absolutely rich. When in reality, you're probably not.
Yeah. But wait, I gotta pay Amex.
Yep. But wait, there's more.
Yeah. So how do you handle sales like in different countries and currencies? Because with Amazon, they opened up this program where you can sell in Mexico, Canada, Europe, and Dubai and all that stuff. And is that made like bookkeeping a bit trickier or like a bit easier with softwares? Like how do you guys handle that? Because for me, I just sell in the US, and I'm actually curious how it works with other sellers from the UK or something like that.
Yeah, the way it's supposed to work is you should be keeping each individual country's currency separate inside of QuickBooks is the way you're supposed to do it. We've seen some bookkeepers, they will not do that and they'll keep everything in US dollar. And the problem is when you're doing that, you end up having these currency exchange rate differences between the two currencies that happen, which is why we strongly recommend using those kind of software tools that bring in that data directly from Amazon and the different selling platforms, because when you do that, it comes in with the actual country currency of whatever it's being sold in. And when you have that come in that through that route, it allows you to have the proper numbers inside of QuickBooks. Then you can make those currency differences inside QuickBooks, which is proper accounting when you're doing that. But by far, utilizing those connectors like that absolutely make the things like night and day, because realistically, it's again the difference we talked about earlier, that it could take you 3 hours to do it per currency almost, versus 30 seconds it just pulls it in. So it's just silliness that anyone that wouldn't want to use these sort of software tools, it's just silly that they wouldn't want to use it.
Yeah, I mean, also not to mention like currencies like fluctuates too, right? Like what it was yesterday or a month ago, it's completely different, stuff like that.
Yeah, changes by the day. And we see the same thing like when people are working with even PayPal is an example that has multiple different currencies depending on how you're receiving payments. And again, we've seen some bookkeepers, they just try and keep everything in US dollars, but when you actually look at the PayPal statement, it breaks it down by here's US, here's Canadian, here's Australian dollars, here's the yen, and
Oh,
all
that's
these different
awesome.
countries. So that's how our statements are, and so there's no way for you to verify that the numbers are actually correct. If you're pulling everything in US dollars, yet the statement shows it in different currencies. There's no way to make sure everything's right, which is why you should bring it in through the proper currency and then make the adjustments based off of that. Because all the reporting, especially with Amazon, when you look at Amazon, each individual currency has its own report in its own currency. It's not in US dollars. So if
Oh,
you're
okay.
trying to reconcile things to make sure that isn't are the numbers that are in QuickBooks in zero aligned with the actual reporting that comes from these different selling platforms, you can't do it if you're keeping it all in US dollars because none of it matches.
Yeah, I was gonna say because with softwares and what you get from Amazon, like the 1099 and all that stuff, it's never exactly the same. So how do you guys deal with that to kind of make sure when you're doing your taxes and accounting is at least presentable or clean?
It's magic.
They'll have to pay you more.
Yeah, absolutely magic. It's not magic, but it almost feels like it sometimes, because there are certain things that go into those 1099 reports that come in, and this comes from experience of just understanding how these numbers work, and also seeing different books over the years. You can pretty much align the different numbers with what's on the 1099. So a lot of it just boils down to knowing exactly what the 1099 shows, and then having proper bookkeeping that has it broken down by each category, so that we can align the categories in the books with what actually shows on the 1099, which is what those software solutions definitely do for you. So I definitely would recommend utilizing software solutions like that, and it would solve that problem.
Awesome. And as we are coming to a close here, I just want to appreciate your time again, Chris. And coming up to Q4, like in a week and a half here, what tips or advice would you give to Amazon sellers to either close out the year strong or prepare for next year's taxes and accounting, and just to help themselves and you guys as well?
Well, the biggest thing that you want to make sure going into Q4 is make sure you don't run out of money. That's That's key number one, because when
Yeah.
you do get ready for taxes, you're going to need money to pay your taxes, assuming you made some money. So definitely try and make some money during Q4, and make sure you're on top of your inventory to make sure you're selling through everything throughout Q4. And that's more or less just from a selling perspective. You want to make sure you have the cash at the end of the season. But from a bookkeeping perspective and a tax perspective, you want to make sure you have your books straightened out. If you do not have any sort of bookkeeping at all going into Q4, it's strongly recommended to start thinking about getting that done immediately. Because as soon as the end of December hits, guess what time it is? It's time for taxes. And if you don't have any sort of bookkeeping, then you have no way of knowing what your true profitability is. Your tax accountant's not going to have any idea what your profitability numbers are. They're going to have nothing to compare against your 1099s, and it becomes this whole mess. So I definitely would strongly recommend trying to work with someone before Q4 so we kind of get knocked out. Uh, because during Q4 you're busy, you're sourcing, you're making sure your inventory is right. There's all sorts of things you're working on. The
Yeah.
last thing you want to really worry about is bookkeeping.
Yeah.
So we want to take care of that as soon as possible. Get it straightened out so you're focused on what needs to be focused on in November, December. So get it taken care of right away. Get software tools to bring that into QuickBooks and Zero. Partner up with a bookkeeping company that fully understands e-commerce. And if you kind of have that trifecta of those various things, you should be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, just staying ahead of the curve because what you will owe as well is you got to be prepared for that. As you mentioned with Q4, you coming off like a high, you've sold record numbers and stuff like that. And I know you mentioned a couple years ago when we chatted, it was like make sure you save some of that money because you're gonna owe some taxes. You don't want to be surprised when it comes to that.
Assuming you made money, yes.
Yeah. That's why we're here, continue on selling and making money.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I love sellers that make money because that means they can pay their taxes, means they can come to us and have us help them out with their taxes. So we love it.
Awesome. And lastly, Chris, where can everyone find you if they want to contact you, ask you about your service, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn and X, are our main two channels we're typically on. You can find me Chris Potter on both of those, and that's Chris Potter 361 on Twitter, and just Chris Potter on LinkedIn. Or you can visit our website at talloakadvisors.com, and you can actually, if you decide you want to have some questions about your bookkeeping, feel free to schedule a strategy session with us. We can have a discussion about your bookkeeping and taxes, and we'll be able to help you out.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Absolutely.
So I hope you guys took tons of value and actionable advice from this conversation with Chris. Again, just want to say thank you to Accounting Cyclops to make this possible. And don't forget to sign up. The link is down below to make sure your business has all the metrics and profits of real-time data, the most accurate it can be. Because again, it connects your accounting softwares, whether you're using Xero or QuickBooks, along to your e-commerce business. And again, you see everything all in one place. So don't forget to sign up. The link is down below. We'll see you in the next one.